If you're thinking about buying a business or starting one, this video is for you. I recently interviewed Dan Opedisano, the founder of Bedrock Restoration and a great friend of mine. And the most interesting aspect of his founder's story is that he actually set out as an independent sponsor to buy a company. But the more due diligence and research he did on his industry of choice, the more convinced he became that he should put his own capital at risk and start the business himself. Which poses a powerful question. If you're looking for a business to buy, do you know your industry well enough to understand if you should pay a multiple of earnings for an established company or start it yourself? If you buy a company, there's a degree of certainty that comes with it because you're buying something that works. But if you're starting the business yourself, you risk burning through your capital if you don't truly understand the space. But the benefit of starting something can be enormous if you get it right. In Dan's case, he owns 100% of his company, which has scaled quickly in just under 3 years. A lot of independent sponsors spend 18 months to 24 months just looking for the business to acquire. And that search comes with uncertainty as well because you may not find one and you may not close. So there's risk to both sides. And in this interview, we'll be exploring how Dan came to the appropriate conclusion and how he managed to build Bedrock, a full-service restoration company focused on water damage, fire and smoke, and mold remediation for both residential and commercial properties. Basically, if a building or structure you own endures some kind of damage, Dan's team can fix it. His business is healthy, growing quickly, and highly profitable. So let's dive in and hear how he pulled it off. You were in finance all of your career. Would love to hear a little bit about the background and then how you got to the point where you decided you wanted to be an independent sponsor.
Sure. I started my career in investment banking. It was a short one. And then I spent time at the NFL doing...
At JP Morgan, right?
Yes, at JP Morgan. I like to say the only good thing out of that is I met my wife. But then I spent time at the NFL doing media finance, and I worked for the CFO of the NFL. Anthony Noto, who's a great guy and taught me a ton. After that, I went to business school, and out of business school, I really didn't know a fitting theme for me is I just was never that passionate in any single industry. And so when I was graduating business school, And
you're being subtle, but you went to Wharton, which I think is worth saying.
Yes, when I was graduating Wharton, I found out about McKinsey Consulting, and I thought it was just so interesting that you could spend anywhere from 3 to 6 months on a project, diving deep into a company, and they could be in different industries and different functions. So that really piqued my interest. And when I got into it, what I noticed about 6 months into it is I love the idea of working in certain environments. And so I asked if on my next project, I can just wear steel toes. That was my ask of my staffer. And
that was the way you chose the industries. Like if I'm wearing steel toe boots, I'm probably in the right one.
Yes, I walked into my staffers. I was in a strategy project doing satellite launch strategy for Lockheed Martin. And I was watching YouTube videos on launches to learn what it meant and talking about payloads and all this stuff. And I had no idea what I was doing. And so I went back and I walked up to my staffer and I said, on my next project, all I care about is I want to be in steel toes. I don't care where you send me.
Dude, I love that.
I don't care what it is. So she said, that sounds great. A week later, she told me, you're going to go to Gary, Indiana to a steel mill. I said, awesome. And my engagement manager called me and he said, you're going to do great on this. The only thing we got to do is we got to roll around in our oranges so we don't look like rookies when we walk on site. I said, done. But to tie it together, then I basically spent the next 5-ish years of my McKinsey career working in, call it blue collar industries. And the reason is because I think everybody has that feeling, when you're on a project or you're doing something and you're like, this is my jam. Like all of a sudden you get really confident and you say that I know I'm good at this. And so there was no slide I could make. There was nothing particular that at McKinsey that I thought I was really good at. But when they asked me, like, can you take this 40-page PowerPoint that we just walked the CEO through? Can you take this to a plant with 4,000 people and get along with them and explain what we're going to do and then implement it? And I was like, absolutely, that's easy. Like all these guys are my uncles, And so it was just arriving on site, getting credibility with the guys. And so I ended up really shining at McKinsey for that. And I kind of became that guy that all of the senior partners wanted to take to these type of projects. So that took me to Elko, Nevada and down into Houston and a bunch of other places all around doing iron mines, chemical plants, gold mines. And so I love that type of work. Where that all ties to Bedrock is that I noticed that my towering strength was my ability to take, let's call it, my ability to be maybe a Wharton grad and all these people use this McKinsey jargon and take all of this kind of white collar way of speaking and make it really simple and explaining it to blue collar guys in a way that they understood. And I really don't like when people use crazy language or use large words to explain stuff just to sound fancier or smarter. And so I always like dumbing things down to, like, I call it a fourth grade level. But that's what I thought my towering strength was. And so when I thought about what industry to be in, I really thought about what do I love about, like, what do I want my day to day to be like? And I wanted to be in a blue collar industry, and I wanted to work with those type of people. And I want to use my skill set of how do we build a great business and get these guys to understand what it takes to run a great business.
I think that's a massive skill set. Just the ability to translate anything, take complex solutions, make them simple, regardless of the industry you're in. I think anyone who gravitates towards that, it just speaks to their understanding in a massive capacity. So I think it's a skill set regardless of wherever you are.
Yeah. And I mean, you have this in spades, but the ability you have to be confident enough to just say to someone, I actually have no idea what you're saying.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
We talk about this all the time. Like when someone explains to you what they do for work and you're like 8 minutes into this conversation and you have no idea what they do. And you're like, wait a second. Who do you work for? Who buys a product from you? Why do they buy it? And then all of a sudden they tell you, and you go, I get what you do.
How do you make money? Where's the revenue come from?
Yeah. So that, I guess that put me into the field of, I want to be in a blue collar industry and call it blue collar services. From there, from there down, it was about identifying which trade within it would be a good business and why. And I think my underlying assumption was, how do I find a trade where maybe the barriers to entry aren't crazy high? So if you think of electrical and plumbing, you need master licenses. They take years. And then how do you find something that certainly won't be automated? And so when I thought of roofing, this may sound crazy, but my first thought was like, man, Jeff Bezos is probably going to figure out a way to drop like a modular roof in with a drone. And in 10 years, that could happen. But I just didn't see, I met a guy that owned a restoration business. And it became apparent to me that for a lot of reasons, not only was it a good trade and a good industry, but it also was something that would be really, really difficult to go away. And so I thought this will be around for a while. And I also thought that the more I learned about the industry, the more opportunity I saw of kind of missing pieces guys had in their companies, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's interesting you mentioned Bezos that way. He actually filed a patent one time for a bunch of drones that would take off in the air and form a warehouse in the sky that then other drones could take objects from and deliver. So he's definitely out there. But what I do love that he always says is people always ask him, how's the future change in the next 10 years? And what he's always looking for is what remains the same in the next 10 years, because that's the easier path to pursue. And I think that's a lot of what you're speaking to.
Very
it's
cool.
Like, what is always going to be here?
Right. And I think one thing I always hear people talking about is like, what is their angle or what's new about what they're coming up with? And everyone thinks that by starting a company, you have to basically develop some new patent or come up with something no one's ever done. And sometimes it's really as simple as these everyday companies that you interact with as a consumer. And people say, well, I don't know, there's a lot of competition there. Well, the other way to look at it is there's a lot of people that started businesses in that industry and are still around and doing well.
It's interesting. You mentioned, I think when we were talking, you said you wanted something that was stable, but also where the customer required immediate assistance. This wasn't something where you thought I was going to go in and build pools because that's wildly cyclical. If there's a recession, people aren't going to build pools. So you wanted something where customers would immediately respond. And I think you said you started looking at Serve Pros. I'd love to understand like your process when you were looking to acquire before you decided to start.
Sure. When I was looking to acquire, I think just because your natural thought, and there's books like Buy Then Build and and it's become a big discussion with search funds and all this about buying a business right out of business school or young professionals, I would say more white collar professionals going into looking for a blue collar business. But I think your ingoing bias is just that, of course, you need to buy a business, because how would you start one? And so I just started down that path of course, I need to buy one. So I started looking at, should I buy an independent or should I buy a franchise? And then when I thought about maybe what skill set I could add to a business, the franchise model became attractive only because it felt like scalability. People that understood systems and knew how to scale could build a big umbrella of franchisees and be maybe a great franchisor.
So that's interesting. You thought, so initially you're kind of fork in the road on the acquisition front. Franchise felt more scalable. And the other path, what were the pros of going more independent model, independently established business?
Yeah, absolutely. The pros of the independence were that the more and more I talked to franchises such as ServPro and ServiceMaster, the more and more you really understood that they are really trying to put you in a box. And just based on their interview questions, and they are trying to make sure that you run their playbook. It's not that I didn't like their playbook. It's just that I had a bigger vision of, well, what about plumbing? What about other services that are adjacent? And I was continually told that that's not our brand. And I understand that, right? They come up with a playbook. They can't just let franchisees run wild with doing different services. And so when I heard that, I got a little wary of it. I also had heard that it may be difficult when you're in a franchise system to differentiate yourself or be sellable at one point. And so I always wondered, like, does that option still remain on the table?
So, okay, so you're going down, you're looking for independently owned business, founder owned businesses, and what industry within kind of all of the, plumbing, construction, remediation, how did you start to narrow that down?
When I met someone that worked at a ServPro, I started to learn more and more about the industry, and I started to visit businesses and then also go on site. I took a trip down to Dallas actually during the freeze. I believe it was the freeze of 21. It was February of 21. And I walked a bunch of facilities and schools and other things with a senior person at ServPro and just got to see sort of at a large scale what they do. It just became more and more interesting to me because all of these hypotheses I had, or my thesis, was coming true as I saw it live. Obviously, this was a flooded out school. They needed it right away. This was an essential service, right? So they were right on site. And then the more I talked to businesses in the industry, the more and more all of my initial hypotheses seemed to be true.
And so how are you getting in touch with them? Like, were you working with bankers, brokers? Were you calling people directly? How'd you develop your call list, and how'd you get people to say, yes, you can come see this?
Yeah. What a shit show. People, like, everybody will tell you, like, get on buy, biz, sell, and get in, like, oh, you have to see these 3 sites and I'll send you some links. And so you make the mistake. Well, maybe it's not a mistake. And I think you've said this before, like, people need to go somewhere to sell their business. So there are good businesses on there, but I signed up for every newsletter of all of these companies. And so every morning I'd go and I'd check all the new ones out, and they're sending me like, a gutter cleaning business and this and this. And then I just found that I was so scattered, like, oh, there's a bowling alley for sale. And it's like, what are we doing here? And so, but I think though, when you looked at how do you get in touch with this is before I really knew the industry. Once I knew what industry I wanted to get into, I didn't do any brokers. I just started. What I literally did was I went on Google. I scraped all the data of restoration companies within 100 miles and got that off into a spreadsheet, printed it up, just started calling every single company, emailing them. I think I had a list of about 100 companies. And
you're just trying to get in touch with the owner or the CEO of all of these businesses? I
just want to talk to the owner, introduce myself, and see if I can convince him to let me buy him lunch, and then talk to him about his business. Because in the initial part, I felt like if you called up and said, hey, are you looking to sell your business? The answer would probably be no. But if I thought we said, hey, can I meet you and understand your industry? Then you had a better chance.
And what was your hit rate with that? How many no's did you hear?
Gosh, I think I met with 2 companies out of 100. I got 2 meetings. one of them was in eastern Wisconsin, and somehow he slipped outside of the 100-mile fence we put on Google. And he was like, I'm game to talk. And it was a guy named Coyne. He runs a great business called Bedrock Restoration. He's like, I'd love to talk. And then we started talking, and then we're like, so where are you located? And he was like, Coacana, Wisconsin. And I was like, what? And it was like 6 hours away. So we found out that we probably weren't going to buy him. But there was a lot of value in it because Coyne today is truly one of my better friends in the industry. And I do a lot of work with him. We give referrals to each other, and I visit him all the time. So something.
That's awesome. You visit with him in person now?
Yes, all the time.
That's wild. Cool. So it's like a small number of people that would talk to you, but they like, I guess you developed real relationships to understand the industry. It's like you didn't have a broad array of conversations, but you got to have some very detailed conversations.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Interesting. So then for you, what was the catalyst as you're exploring this? I mean, maybe it was that there weren't that many options to buy, but was there something else that led you down the path of, I understand this well enough that I want to start it myself?
Yes. I would say that one, my wife was really helpful, who you know well. We went out to dinner, and she was like, because I had a letter of intent out to buy a Service Master, and without using any numbers, but it was going to be an SBA loan. My wife had to sign it. So we went out to dinner, and she basically was like, all you've told me is that you really understand this industry. And all you've told me is that you don't like their brand, and you don't like them, and you don't like their warehouse, and you don't think they do a good job at this. And I was like, I know, that's why I'm buying it, because I'm going to turn it. And I thought it was a really helpful conversation, because what I opened my eyes to was, yes, you can turn this around, but you're going to spend a lot of money. It might take you 2 years. You're going to be frustrated. And it is hard. I mean, change management is really hard. Ultimately, too, at the end of the day, I wanted to control my brand. And I felt that the only way to really control my brand was to build my own brand. And so that it could be a clean start. And from the first interaction that anybody ever had with it, I can own that interaction and make sure that I'm building it the way that I want to build it.
I think that's really powerful. I think doing diligence to the point of understanding whether or not you need to buy or build is maybe one of the most thorough indications I've seen that you really understand what you're diving into. I mean, that to me is really impressive. I've started using it as an example when I talk to people where they say, should I be interested in this industry? Like, do you know it well enough to answer that question, whether or not you should buy a multiple of earnings or whether or not you should invest the capital yourself? Buying a multiple of earnings comes with some certainty that you're getting something. Investing the capital yourself, if you don't really understand it, you're going to get it wrong, and you've just burned through your startup cash. So it's to me like a very cool point to be at. I
think that's a great, I haven't really heard it that way till you put it that way. And it makes me think that what you're really asking yourself is, if you've done enough research, then it means that you understand what it is you're buying. And if you understand what it is you're buying, then you should also understand what it would take to build that. And if you really know those two, you can actually compare them and answer the question that you're asking.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating approach, and one I hadn't thought about before. I really like it. What I remember you telling me at one point was that to start a business in this space, you have to build credibility and trust with the brand really quickly, and you got to get people to pick up the phones. If you can do those two things, you can hire the talent, you can get the trucks, you can have the warehouse, you can buy the assets.
Yeah.
And it was just so crystal clear to you. Your conviction was so high. There was no, if I put this capital to work, is it going to work? You're like, no, I understand this space. This is going to happen.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of an amazing statement.
I bet I sounded way more confident to you than I was, but I'm really great that you loved the conviction. I was confident that we would get a phone call. And once I knew we got a phone call, I was 100% confident that we would do a great job.
And your first phone call, how good did that feel?
Pilar's a video of it. It's comical.
No, really?
It's 9 p.m. It's about 9:30 on a Monday night, November 15th. Friday's our 3-year anniversary. And so it was Monday night, November 15th. The phone rang, and it was through a lead service, a lead gen service that intercepts the call and then diverts it to your number. And so in came this lead, and he was like, here we go. I've practiced the script. I know what I'm going to say. And on the call, I just think I was speaking so bad. Like, yep, absolutely. We can get there tonight. And so we ended up, we got a call at 9:30 at night. I was in the home till probably 2 a.m. With the manager. And it was really cool. But what I thought was so fun about the first job was that it's really weird. And Mark says this all the time, Plunkett has said this, like how good it felt to get the first check. It was so cool to think that somebody wrote out a check to us and was like, this is what I believe you're worth for your success. Yeah. And that was cool.
It's a phenomenal feeling. All the work you do up to that first check is completely underestimated always. Right. But yeah, Mark Plunkett's a huge advocate of it, and understanding it in the private equity space is a huge advantage. And so are you comfortable saying like how Bedrock scaled to this day, whether it's number of employees or revenue or job sites?
Yeah.
And over what time period? Because it's been pretty fast.
Yeah, I can say, so we, from an employee standpoint, we started November of 21 with 2 employees, including myself. We were probably at about 6 employees by the fall of 2021. And then around probably in the spring of 2022, we were near the 10 to 12. Today, we're 15 employees on the restoration side, and we're 5 employees on the plumbing side. So a total of 20.
It's awesome, man. And I think the other thing people overlook, if you go this route, if you know the industry well enough and you start it, you own 100% of this thing. You know, you don't have LPs, you didn't raise money. It's, you have full autonomy on salary, dividends, however you want to compensate yourself versus having a, management fee agreement or some percentage of EBITDA. It's entirely at your discretion. And I think that's such a powerful tool as well.
Totally. And you know this really well because you sat in these board meetings, and I wish just one time I would have had a board member like you at a company I was at. We never had that. We weren't lucky enough. But one thing I kind of said when I started it was, I never say never, but I said, I will never have somebody walk into a boardroom with me with a suit on and tell me how to run my business. Never. So it's a good feeling that probably won't happen, but never say never.
Yeah, it's really funny. Going back to rolling around in the dirt and whatever attire you had to go into a steel mill, I feel like you do have to like sometimes dress the part, be the part, and accommodate the culture you're visiting. You can't be the same guy everywhere you go, or it just rubs people the wrong way from the very beginning. It's just a matter of respect when you show up. I think, when someone's built a business, it's so easy to come in as the private equity guy and say like, oh, their data's terrible. They have no marketing department. We got to bolster all of these different areas or bring in new talent without ever understanding what it took just to get to there. And most people in that space, most people on the investment side really don't understand what that takes. No.
And I think one thing that you are phenomenal at and probably did at every company you're at, though, is even if Peter walks in a white button-down shirt and, Peter's 6'6" with loafers and nice pants and a white button-down shirt, and even if you walk in and you look different or dress different than the company, I'd imagine that your companies could feel the effort that you put in and the effort behind your questions. And you probably dug into their data and you really were interested to ask good questions and help the business. And as long as that was the case, I don't care if someone wears a suit into my boardroom, but I just would appreciate that you can't just come in and ask the 3 typical questions that you're supposed to ask, or hammer me on a dashboard that you don't even understand the KPIs,
Yeah, man. Well, I really appreciate that. That's exceptionally kind of you to say. Definitely appreciate it. I think this is awesome, man. Like I'd love to follow up and do a few more, like either on your tech stack, other things that you've done. I think it's really impressive. I think the story here. So for everyone listening, I just flew up to Minneapolis, got to talk to Dan and got to talk to him about what he wants to do next, which is start expanding to new locations. And the best way to do that, the best way to incentivize employees or new managers. So I think there's a longer growth story here and potential to maybe even look at acquisitions, but it's a phenomenal place to be in, to have your platform be something that you own in its entirety and that you've developed. It's your culture, it's your people. And you can see that when you tour. Like the guys there absolutely respect you, absolutely respect each other, and really love being there. It's like very apparent. And I think the brand, to your point, is going to mean a lot. Like you're going to build something very valuable, not only on the tangible side with your business, but on the intangible side that will allow you to scale quickly. It's just badass.
Awesome. I really appreciate you saying that. And why don't you not be too humble, and why don't you say how long it took you to build the model that I needed you to build to give me the insight? Come on. It wasn't 10 minutes.
So yeah, we were in Dan's office. We had the big screen up on the wall, and I think we built his equity incentive model in what, maybe 30 minutes or something like that.
7 minutes. And if you hadn't been perfect in formatting, it could have been 4, but you had to make sure to format it correctly. But it was what's hugely insightful, and what I think is really cool, and whatever makes it out onto this podcast, seriously, is that the way that you talk to me about my business and the way that you look at it is truly like, I don't think about it like that all the time. And you ask these questions about like capital and this, and then you actually are almost explaining to me what I did think of, but I didn't think of it that way. And so that it's actually like really helpful, because you're helping me confirm, because when I actually understand what you're saying, I'm like 30% of the time, I'm like, Peter, what does that mean? But when I understand what you're saying, then I'm like, oh, that is how I thought. And then it makes me feel better, because Peter's like, well, this is how you would want to think about it. It's like, great.
Yeah.
So
really I think it's interesting. I spoke last night at SMU, and one of the things I was trying to tell everyone is, if you can understand the 3-statement framework, the three primary financial statements, and how they really flow together really well, and then you can explore it in a lot of different contexts at a lot of different companies, and keep coming back to the fundamentals of how they come together, it enhances your capacity to apply it creatively in every new situation. And I think it's one of the things that's really helped me the most, and that I try to tell people starting out in this industry, whether you want to be an investor or an operator, if you understand that framework, your capacity to internalize things that are happening without having to put it on paper, it lets you manage operations better. It makes you faster in a boardroom, makes you faster in front of an investment committee. I think it's one of the better things you can do for your skill set. But it's a little tedious at first.
Yeah,
definitely.
It is, and it's overwhelming.
But you love Excel. I mean, you're all over your dashboards, the amount of detail you put into them. It's really impressive.
Yeah, but for you, it's easy, but it is hard. I mean,
so you can tell we kept it going, but I had to cut us off. I'm learning that interviewing someone you admire results in too many compliments to share on the World Wide Web. Dan and I continued talking for a while, and ultimately concluded we're going to have to do this again. We considered topics like building a strong culture at a startup, building a brand, and how to develop your technology stack as options. If you have any thoughts for a future topic, please let me know in the comments. All right, team. Thanks for watching.
Thank you very much, dude. I really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time to do this again.
Dude, absolutely. It's awesome. Really enjoy it. We'll have to follow up.
Yeah, awesome.